Your hosts are The Great Order and No White Guilt. And this is the After Party. The crown winner of last week is Joseph, financially gifting $75. Thank you so very much, and a big congratulations to Joseph. In second place was a returning name, Machiavellius Sucks, financially gifting $25. Thank you so much for that, and congratulations to you as well. Financially gift on entropy at 15%, which will be up in just a moment, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions. Or you can financially gift over on Cash App, which is at no cost whatsoever. Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Now, today we have the one and only Dr. Ricardo Duchesne with us on tap. A big honor. Ricardo, please introduce yourself to our esteemed community. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into the conversation, brother.
Yes, hello, guys. I'm happy to be here talking to you two again. I think it was about 2 years ago that we had a conversation.
Yeah.
And some people, I'm sure, that listen to you may already know me, but in case they don't, I have a blog. It is called the Council of European Canadians, and you can Google that using my name and that the name of the blog. Also, I recently joined GAP. That was around mid-March, and you can find me there as well. And you can also find my books in Amazon. One of them, Canadian Decay, was taken out for a few months, and about 70 customer reviews were deleted, but it is still there. And we can talk maybe a little bit about that later on. An updated version has come out of Canada in Decay, my third book. And so that's who I am.
Well, yes, thank you for being with us. As I was putting in the chat, it's we're just at about the 2-year mark. I think it was July or early August. I'll have to go and look on our website. It's all cataloged there on the afterparty.tv.
Yeah.
But as we normally do when it's someone's first time, that was a very wide-ranging conversation, and we dug into some of your thinking. If anyone likes what they hear today, definitely please go back on that site or here on Jason's YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube to listen to that first one with Ricardo. But today we're just going to check in. I was looking at some of the things on Council of European Canadians, his blog, where Ricardo writes and guest authors write as well. And some of you may know his books have been very influential on me. And when I was doing more video content, when in my early days, a lot of them was influenced by that. But we just want to check in today and have Ricardo tell us about the situation in Canada. We like to talk to people from all over the Western world and some of the things going on now. So to that point, we know that you have been vocal about the media, particularly, and how they're framing things in Canada and how they're setting up the public with these ideas that they're proliferating into the consciousness, the media war on whites. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, the war against whites has intensified. I think we all know that. It really started to intensify with the election of Trump. And then, even though he was brought down and it was an organized, orchestrated effort and it was successful, and the Biden administration came in, and you would think that they would relax a little bit, that they were satisfied with having defeated him, because the anticipation before COVID hit was that he would get elected, but he was defeated. And nevertheless, even though that happened and they were happy for a few days, the attacks really intensified, and they took it as an opportunity to make sure that no populist leader is ever elected again. And so in Canada, we didn't have Trump. We had the opposite, Justin Trudeau, who in many ways is the most leftist guy you can imagine in the Western world. Just in his whole composure, his attitudes, the way he goes on day in, day out, attacking the Canada of the past. Most recently, there was this so-called discovery of a burial. Many natives were buried together in Kamloops, British Columbia. And apparently, it was a residential school organized by Catholics. So this has been hyped up again as a way of attacking the history of whites in Canada. Just today, I think that Justin Trudeau said that legal measures will be taken against the Catholic Church if they don't do something about what they did in the past. So, in other words, they are being held accountable for what happened many, many years ago. And the thing is, the media doesn't really tell us how exactly those children die. All they say is that they found a burial ground where about 215 native children were buried. It could easily have been that they died of diseases. That was common in those days. In fact, someone alerted me to the fact that in Scotland, there was a case, I think about 2 years ago, where they also found a burial ground with many children, white children, buried there. And nobody came to the conclusion that this was just some sort of willful act of aggression against children. But here, that's how it is being framed, and it's been going on day in, day out. And I think it's important to realize, and I think other people have noticed this. They noticed it with George Floyd, and they notice it with every incident they can find in which some minority suffers for some reason or other. They take it as an excuse to intensify the attacks against whites. And this is not incidental. The thing is that diversity is the biggest program ever devised in human history to change the nations of the Western world. And all these continuous attacks on whites are an intrinsic component of the diversification of the West. They go together. You can't bring about this kind of program and not expect that whites are going to pay a price, and not expect them to continuously put whites on the defensive, because it means you have to change the education, the schools, the curriculum. You have to change many laws. You have to redirect funding towards minorities. You have to recreate the whole nation in such a way that it successfully, as they see it, it successfully brings about this kind of racial and cultural diversification. So I think it's important to understand that these things are not going to stop. They're going to be intensified, and we are going to go through years of ongoing, persisting attacks against whites, and that's the reality that we're facing.
What is, obviously we know the same thing is happening in all Western nations, but every nation has its own hues and emphases and nuances of how this is going about. Is there any immune system that you see perking up in white people in Canada, either just among regular folks, and or is there any kind of media outlet where someone has a voice, at least somewhat in this direction? Obviously, people who speak as frankly as we do clearly would not be on mainstream media, but here in the States, of course, people have their different opinions of him, and you could always slice and dice things, but Tucker Carlson comes to mind, of course, at least as someone who has a large audience that at least addresses some of these things. I mean, there are certain third rails he doesn't touch. I don't know if that's because he's controlled or it's because he just doesn't feel that way. We can only guess. So no one's saying he's perfect, but at least it's in that direction. Do you have anyone in the media, any kind of outlet that's pushing back? And also, as I said, do you have any finger on the pulse about regular, ordinary folks pushing back as well?
Well, the mainstream conservative party has basically gone along with just about everything the liberals do or the NDP does. The NDP is another party in Canada. Recently, the former leader of the Conservative Party, Brian Mulroney, said that we need more immigrants. There are not enough coming here. They accepted this view that by the end of this century, the population of Canada should increase to 100 million. The population here is just over 30 million. And they want it to be increased by intensifying the number of immigrants that arrive every year. Under Justin Trudeau, he was elected 2016 first, and under him, the numbers have been increasing steadily, and they were already increasing under the previous conservative government of Harper. With Harper, the numbers were, I would say, if I remember, very close to 300,000 per year, sometimes above 300,000. With Justin Trudeau, they're consistently above 300,000, 350, 370. And he has said that for 2021, 22, and 23, he wants the numbers to be over 400,000. And recently it was reported that even during the lockdowns of 2021, this year, that we are on pace to achieve the 400,000 number. So you can see that even as the nation is locked down, I cannot travel to the provinces that are nearest to where I am because you're not allowed to travel. Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of immigrants keep arriving during these months. And many of them, in fact, the majority, are coming from India. And India had this spread of COVID that people are talking about last month and so on. So many of them were coming from India. So I'm not surprised that the lockdowns keep being reaffirmed because of that, because a lot of immigrants are coming in with that are infected. So what I'm trying to get at is that even during the lockdown, they see as a key priority bringing immigrants. And they argue that the way to get out of the economic downturn that occurred during the lockdown is by bringing immigrants. And they emphasize immigrants from India, the Philippines, and Nigeria in particular. Those are the three main sources of immigrants right now for Canada.
And what kinds of industries do they say these people should be working in? Is it softer things in computing and consulting?
Well, in the case of Canada, they do have a program. It's called a points system, where they do try to bring immigrants that meet certain educational criteria that can speak either one of the languages, French or English. So it is true that overall, the immigrants that come here are slightly better than the ones that come to the United States. In fact, you could say even more than slightly better. Nevertheless, and I don't want to get into this right now, when you measure the cost vis-a-vis the benefits, the costs are higher bringing immigrants here. But I'm not going to get into that now. I sort of want to bring the point that everything that you see around that is anti-white, all the instances and cases that you see in the United States and in Canada has to always be framed around this incredible program of diversity via immigration. It's an obsession. The elites have invested everything on this, and they're going to make sure it works as they perceive it. They're not backing down on this. They're going all out. So the conservatives and everybody else, the journalists, have gone along. So to your question, is there any dissenting voice? Well, not among mainstream conservatives, far less than you find among Republicans. At least among Republicans, you have a populist side. But here, maybe one guy, you might say a few things. Then you have the PPC, which is a party that emerged in the last few years that is slightly a bit populist, but not a lot. And they only got, if I remember, it was like very little, not even 3%, if I remember, of the vote. It was 1.3. I can't quite remember right now. So then you have Rebel News, which is a type of news that says things that sound Trumpian by Canadian standards, but they don't really question what to me is the biggest political issue, is the demographic replacement. The people that are in charge now realize that immigrants are the biggest weapon that they could possibly come up with. The left has been looking for an agent to bring about a transformation in the West. At one point, it was the working class, but the working class didn't play the revolutionary role that it was supposed to play. The moment they got higher wages, they identify with the society they were living in, and they tended to be nationalistic. And then they look to the peasantry. But the peasantry, you could get a peasant revolution in undeveloped agrarian societies. You couldn't get them in capitalistic societies. So in the Western world, that didn't work. Then they started looking for all kinds of different groups, and some of them are very powerful: the Black civil rights movement, women, gays. But in my estimation, sometime around the 1980s into the 1990s, in a way that it was not fully organized and not fully thought through, they realized immigrants are the ultimate weapon of the left and the ultimate way by which we can defeat, in their view, the power of whites and whatever capitalism from the radical left. But then the conservative globalist right sees it differently, but nevertheless sees immigrants as well as an incredible historical agent to bring about a transformation that will be permanent. So that's why I'm obsessed, and I keep bringing the point: immigrants. And I'm not trying to target them. Immigrants didn't initiate this. But let's not be naive. Even though they didn't initiate this, once they come here and they sense that the whole of the society around is not for the people who created those nations, but celebrates them, admires them, takes care of them, they get galvanized. They it's instinctive. They like that, and they want to affirm their own people, their own race. So they do become a force in the Western world. And I think that right now in Canada is in many ways the epicenter of multiculturalism. The theory of multiculturalism was really developed by Canadians. And I don't see in Canada a critique of this theory of multiculturalism. The conservatives used to talk about assimilation, but they given up. They accepted multiculturalism now. It is spreading every institution, in every school, everywhere. So
when was that starting?
I know it sounds black pill, but in Canada, we don't have any real challenge to what is going on, and I don't see how it is going to be stopped right now.
You must feel a little lonely. What about artists and writers and academics like you? There has to be a few other people. Who do you talk to up there? Who else can we check out for news from Canada?
Very few. There are a few guys, but we are isolated. I mean, I have met quite a few guys, but we have to be realistic that just because my book Canada became a bestseller, I'm glad, and there is an audience for it, and there was a high demand for it, and because my blog Council of European Canadians has been successful, and I have steady readers and contributors. I don't belong to a mass political movement. We live in an age of masses. Lenin said that without the masses, you're not going to have a revolutionary movement. He also said without revolutionary theory, you don't have a movement either. But he did emphasize you need a mass of people in the age of democracy, in the age of masses, of working classes, of big cities. And our side here in Canada does not have by any means a mass support. There are people out there that inside themselves, they are becoming increasingly apprehensive. They are realizing something is wrong, something is amiss. Why all this talk about anti-white this, anti-white that? But it's hard for them to put the dots together. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that diversity has been institutionalized at every level. So it has been incentivized. There are many whites that stand to gain from diversity. And if you oppose it, you stand to lose a lot. You're going to be ostracized, and you're not going to be able to get a job if you openly question it. There are all kinds of grants and jobs and so on promoting diversity. So people jump into that bandwagon to make a life.
Ricardo, just to give a quick overview and understand Canada a little bit better for anyone listening. Again, we know this is going on in all of these nations, but the picture you're painting is that there's less pushback in Canada, even than in places like the States and the UK, other places in the Anglophone world, and probably most of continental Europe as well. You said a few minutes ago that Canada was a hotbed of multiculturalism, and a lot of the ideas started there and proliferated, spread out. Are you able to just, I know it's a big ask, but just give us a very brief overview of the Canadian character and why that is, and why there's this lack of a pushback against this?
Yes, of course, when you say the Canadian character is a huge nation and the Quebecois are kind of different.
Sure.
But I would say Anglo-Canadians generally have always been a conservative people, but not in the way we would understand that word today. It doesn't mean that they want to conserve Canada as it was in the past. It means that they tend to trust and accept what their leaders say and what their institutions say. They don't like to stand above. One individual doesn't want to stand above what everybody else is doing. For example, where I live, the effects of COVID have been marginal. Very, very few people here have died. And yet, people dutifully follow mask mandates. I many times walk into places without a mask. I'm always followed, identified very quickly, and asked that I must wear a mask. And I raise a few questions and so on and so forth. But they really follow it almost like they are happy. In the winter, they would wear masks outside when they're walking. Many of them would wear masks, even when they're alone. There are no people. There are not that many people where I am, and they will wear masks, and they do it inside their cars, and they feel good about it. They like. I mean, these are not bad attitudes to have when your leaders are loyal to your nation, your heritage. They're not bad attitudes to conform to what the majority thinks, and to the basic norms of your society. But right now we're living in a very different time, because as I said before, we have never witnessed this phenomenon in human history, in which the leaders decide that there has to be a dramatic alteration in their societies, that there is something wrong about the very fact that the whites are the majority in their societies. That is identified as inherently wrong, and that it has to be remedied, and that if only you bring people from many backgrounds and they coexist together, they will have resolved the conflicts that they perceive people had throughout history, which is that they fight along racial and ethnic lines. The Second World War had a big psychological effect on Western peoples. It made them believe that that was the result of white homogeneity, even though, as you know, the British who fought the Nazis were homogeneous, and we in Canada had immigration restrictions, very strong restrictions against immigration from non-Western nations. But these same nations then began to look into themselves, their history, and to believe that there was something inherently wrong about their past. They were the most prosperous nations. They were the nations with the best schools, the best hospitals, the most harmony. I mean, Canada was a very harmonious society by any criteria you use in history. And yet they turned against themselves and began this process, this incredible experiment. In my book, Canada in Decay, I identified Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current prime minister. I identified his words. He uses the word, the biggest experiment, something like that, he says. That what we want with multiculturalism is to create a whole new society. Nothing like this will have ever been witnessed in history. And Canadians have been made to believe that Canada is so unique because it is multicultural. They don't know that this is true in the United States. It became true in Australia, in New Zealand, in Britain, France, you name it. So it's a Western spread idea. And of course, I don't want to be overtly pessimistic. What I'm saying is that in Canada, right now, we need to be realistic. There is no mass opposition to a program that is deeply, it's everywhere. Wherever you go, it's everywhere. It's the religion of this nation. Diversity. If you ever question it, and I have done it with people, they think there is something wrong with you. You possibly must be psychologically unstable and mad to think that diversity has any flaws. So that's the reality.
So you mentioned COVID, and of course, we're on a lot of platforms, but YouTube is still where most people congregate. So Jason will have to let us know if we get off the rails a little bit here too much. YouTube is pretty strict about the parameters that they like to keep people in when talking about this. But how do you see the COVID situation playing into this, and these leaders, quote unquote, in the West using this crisis to, as anyone would, using it to their ends and to further everything you've been speaking about? Aside from, you already spoke to one interesting point about how it's justified for increased jobs, which is interesting because these jobs they're bringing in Indian people for, technically, if we know that they're not trying to have a logical argument, but if you wanted to have a logical argument, it would actually be cheaper probably for them to just pay them offshore and have them do these kinds of, all this work could be done remotely, all of this on computers. They could be in India. Canadian company could hire these people to do this work on their computers in India, not have to have them come to Canada. But of course, we know that there's more of an agenda to it. But anything besides that you see this whole madness of the COVID situation being used to further this agenda?
First, I'm not of the view that COVID is a hoax. I do think there is something to it. I think that the way
meaning what, that there's actually a virus, like there is something, there is some form of a virus. Sure,
there is a virus that happens to hit people with weak immune systems who are 70 years and older than that. It happens to hit them harder than a flu would. So it isn't just a flu for them. It happens to hit children not as hard as a flu. So they're not as susceptible to this virus as the particular population I just mentioned. The other thing, we know that it was used. I mentioned before, COVID was used. It doesn't mean that this was planned. It doesn't mean that they unleashed it and it was all organized from the beginning. They simply exploited the opportunities that COVID offered it, and the Democrats, the left is far more astute than the conservatives. They immediately sense that this was something handed to them from heaven, and they said it to bring Trump down, and they use it to the maximum. They hyped up the fears, they hyped up the lockdowns. So all of that stuff came as a result of COVID. In the case of Canada, as I was saying, I don't know immigration numbers in the United States. From what I heard, Trump really did cut down immigration when the lockdowns were going on. And in Canada, they had to for a few months, but they were desperate from the beginning to open the borders. And around November in 2020, it was when they announced that they would dramatically increase immigration numbers to over 400,000 to compensate for what they had lost. So COVID didn't derail them in any way as far as the program of diversity is concerned. The other thing is that this goes back to also to the point I was making before. Our side does not control the production of knowledge. The left controls it. They control all the universities. They control the publishing houses. They control the magazines, the TV stations. They control social media, Twitter, and so on, and YouTube. So they control the narrative of COVID. Now, finally, with Tucker Carlson, it's sort of coming out a bit that this may have escaped from a lab in China. He was saying this for months, but people didn't take him seriously. Now it looks like he was right, and a few others were also saying that. But the reason that we were not able to make this case is we don't control the production of knowledge. And so we look always like marginalized people who don't really have science on their side, don't have the facts, don't have the publications. I mean, in my case, they had to fabricate the notion that, Ricardo is no longer doing peer review publications. The Council of European Canadians is not peer review, which is ridiculous because I never claimed it was. It's just like any journalistic piece. You express your
It's like saying is a newspaper peer reviewed.
Yeah, no newspaper is peer review, but it's sort of a way to say we are the peer review people here. And the reality is knowledge is power. The left understood this a long time ago. Michel Foucault, the French thinker, coined that term, that knowledge is power, and he did an investigation of various ways in which discourses had been used to solidify and enhance the power of, in those days, they used to say the capitalist, the power of the capitalist, but they read Foucault and then apply it themselves, and now they're in control. And the way they see it is, we have the power and we have the knowledge. And the truth is, when you open Atlantic Magazine, Harper's Magazine, I mean, these are sort of the more literate magazines, and then you look at all the journals and the conferences, they're in charge of all of them. So they have that kind of power over everyone, and they control the COVID narrative. It would have been a very different reality if our side had the same opportunity. And this is why all those medias locked everybody out. They took them all out. Right when this was happening, the COVID, Twitter started kicking everybody out. YouTube started canceling and taking videos out, and so on and so
on. Again, knowing that we're on YouTube, and knowing that there's really not much pushback in Canada, since we're talking to you and it's been a little while, I have to ask, anything you have to say about the perceptions of the United States election in Canada, and or how Biden and his administration is viewed there right now?
I don't see people really saying that it was stolen here. They take it that it was a legitimate process. There is no way. I mean, there is complete, total consensus among all the mainstream political parties. We don't have like Fox News here at all on television. Rebel News, you know, it is critical of Justin Trudeau, but they tend to concentrate too much on so-called scandals. Oh, there was a particular member of the Liberal Party who didn't follow the exact rules, and maybe he took too much money on a trip, and little things like that. They don't concentrate on what I think are the big issues, which is the demographics of Canada and how that changes the power dynamic.
Let me jump in really quickly. It's been a very exciting conversation so far. Folks, if you have any questions or comments, we have a little bit under, I guess, or just over half an hour left. Financial gifts as well. Please get those in now so that we can have those for the great Dr. Duchesne before we let him go. It's a big honor to have him with us. And I do want to say, though, of course, Jared's mentioned a couple times about the YouTube and the restriction. So has Ricardo mentioned a couple times about their control, the anti-white control of all of these mediums of communication. So to speak to that, and then I have a question for Dr. Duchesne. I guess I will first say that you are, folks, look into Dr. Duchesne. This is obviously, you can tell by his careful thought, the careful constructions that he builds when discussing these matters, that this is a very intelligent gentleman, very well-read gentleman. He has suffered for having the courage to speak his mind against the anti-white regime, the power structure, capital R. And so we honor and salute him for those acts, and especially for the willingness to stand on the front line and take their metaphorical bullets, in some cases still metaphorical. Having said that, of course, we have to say that this channel is nothing said here is a statement of absolute fact. Look into it for yourself. And of course, if you are confused about where to look to CNN. You know that that's always the place to look for all the right answers. And make sure that you get voices, you hear voices from the other side. Whatever the anti-whites have to say, make sure you hear. If you haven't heard them yet, if you haven't turned on your TV or anything else, because they're everywhere, make sure you get those. And when it comes to things like the pandemic known as COVID-19, we agree wholeheartedly with whatever the WHO says. So if they have one opinion on Monday and we agree, and on Tuesday, if it changes, we agree with that, because those are the absolute officials as far as absolute fact. But nonetheless, I will restate that you have here a very circumspect professor, doctor, educated gentleman who is speaking here today, and you should be able to take that for what it's worth. Now, Ricardo, I want to ask you about this. Is it Keelanani, I think her name was. I'm going to read very briefly from an article. This news story is out on many different media. A New York City-based psychiatrist, educated at Harvard, told an audience at the Yale School of Medicine, so this is top of the Western world, in April, that she had fantasies. Well, first of all, I want to mention the name of her speech, because this is also important, and I have that over. The speech was titled "The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind." So she's talking about white people, the psychopathic problem of the white mind, educated at Harvard and a highly lauded speaker at Yale. And here in April, Dr. Keelanani says that she has a fantasy of, quote, unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, close quote. She went on to say something about skipping, let's see, it's like with a bounce in my step. She'd walk away after doing that, quote, with a bounce in my step, close quote, and that white people, quote, make my blood boil, close quote, and that, let's see, and are, quote, are out of their minds and have been for a long time, close quote. So this is the talk of the academic field right now. And again, I will just say, although this is being reported across various media, regime establishment, mainstream media, we will just say it is subject to whatever CNN decides to report about this issue. But let's assume, we will postulate for a moment that this woman actually said this. Is this what you saw while in academia? And do you see this getting worse? And any other thoughts that you would like to share with folks to give them an insight into that insular environment?
Oh, it is getting worse. And there is a sense in which it had to get worse, because the program is never ending, in the sense that diversification, as far as we are being told, doesn't have an end in point. It's not a normal policy in which you say we want to achieve this and then it is achieved and you move on. This is ongoing, and it has been going for decades now, and it never seems to be enough. We have places in Canada like Richmond, BC, where the population is overwhelmingly Asian, but it still doesn't seem to be enough. I wrote an article a few months ago, and I gap about this just before, that the president of the University of British Columbia, just after the George Floyd death and the riots, said that UBC, he will intensify diversity at every level in his university. So I went to investigate what was the nature of diversity at UBC already, and I found out that only about 35% of the population is white. This is probably the second biggest, if not one of the biggest universities in Canada. The population was 35%. Chinese alone is 39%. This is in 2015. So now it's even worse. And white males are 1 in 6 of the population. I have been there. It's totally diversified. And there are about 10 programs and institutes dedicated to things that are about diversity, about other cultures, and so on. Plus, we know all the professors in the arts department are leftists, and so on. So you sort of wonder, well, what exactly does he want to diversified at every level. There are 25 professionals hired in an office called the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I looked at all the names that are hired there, and they say our job is to monitor and develop diversity here, and they're already hired. So you wonder, what exactly does he want to diversify? So we can see there is no end, and they will keep pushing and pushing, because in a sense they recognize that what they're doing is very dramatic. They're displacing a people and their heritage and their culture, so they have to condemn them. They have to find a reason for it. Why would you say that whites are good, that they achieve great things, Canadians? Why would you celebrate John A. Macdonald? His statues were taken down even more now after the deaths of these children were found. Some politicians said his statue has to go because he's responsible for some of these residential schools. So you can have a society dedicated to diversification and in any way teach students that, oh, well, the society that we are replacing happen to have been pretty good in creating a railroad system, a healthcare system, an infrastructure. No, you have to condemn it, because otherwise, how are you going to justify it? Then that incites the non-whites. It gets them to wonder. On the one hand, they're incentivized. They feel great. We're going to get the jobs. We're going to be hired. And they feel they need to justify their own promotion ahead of whites. And then they read about it. Whites are portrayed as genocidal, inherently racist. So I think this woman that you mentioned, and I read about it, that she has digested all this anti-white propaganda. But there is also other psychological components going on here. There is a sense in which when they see images and they look at whites, they really resent them. They resent the fact that they know the images coming from the history of Britain, of France, are beautiful images of their architecture, their buildings. They sort of know, although they don't fully understand or don't fully know, that science came from whites. That the very universities that they teach were created by whites. That white families look pretty good in those pictures they see from the 50s. It doesn't look like a racist, oppressed society. It doesn't look that way. So they resent that a lot. And then they go back sometimes to their nations and they see the dramatic contrast. Man, now I realize where I was living. I was living in a smelly place. It's corrupt. Things don't function properly. They're dysfunctional. Oh, now I see that this technology, these cars, all that stuff was created by whites. So these people themselves have psychological reasons for disliking whites. And that's what we're seeing with this woman. She just resents those women with the blonde hair, red hair, blue eye, green eyes, all that stuff is going into this.
Yeah, I see Jason shaking his head, and I know Jason's articulated a lot about the envy. Not that we want to assume what's going on in someone else's head, but we're taking them at their word, and we're looking at their actions and their choices, and unfortunately tracks very much with what you're saying. I don't know, Jason, if you have anything to add. I'll just quickly say, for a woman like this, obviously it's an extreme example, but unfortunately she's not the only one. It sounds like what you're saying, Ricardo, is that there might be a native resentment there, but it's fanned, of course, by all of the anti-white propaganda that's put out there against us. And the image I had is that it's almost a backdraft, is that it's designed to hurt us, but it does flow in both directions as well, because all of the anti-white propaganda and narrative, when it is ingested into the psyche of someone who's not white but is here in the Western nations, as you so well articulated, it's creating a cognitive dissonance in that person. So this is not to excuse them at all. What that woman said is sick, and in a healthier society, she would be taken out of her post and and maybe even assessed psychologically. I don't know what the proper measures would be. It's not for me to say, but certainly wouldn't be in the position that she's in. But it's taking something that's already there, and it's like putting gasoline on the fire, because there's something, as you said, even if they can't articulate it, even in the subconscious, they know that they're being told all these horrible things, and yet there's a disconnect with the beauty, with the structure, and there must be this kind of strange one foot in each world kind of feeling where they want to be in the Western world and Western cultures where there is that higher technology, that higher trust society, that rule of law, that hygiene, that comfort. And yet at the same time, they're being told that this is inferior, but they know they come from somewhere differently. So I don't need to restate what you said. You said it beautifully, but it just, my takeaway, as I said, is I would posit it as a backdraft. That's the image that I get. And it just, it takes whatever pathologies are in some of these people and amplifies them. It multiplies them. And that's the phenomenon that we're seeing in a woman like this.
Yeah, if because I may have sounded a bit too black pill initially, but the good thing about this intensification against whites is that it was bound to happen. It is happening, and it is good because now we can see the implications of diversity. Diversity cannot be an innocent policy. It is inherently aimed at radically changing the nations of the West. Why would the Bolsheviks, the Marxists, topple capitalist nations if not because they hated them and they wanted to radically create something new? Well, the same thing. Why would you diversify Western nations if you did not think and argue continuously that there is something wrong with the society we are replacing? That's why we're doing it, guys. Look at what they did to those children. They bury them as if, that doesn't happen all day long outside the West. But they need to do this. So they will continuously intensify the war, and this will awaken whites. And they're aware of it. That's why Biden keeps saying that white supremacy is the biggest threat, because the left is more astute than the right. They anticipate that the whites will start reacting. They're already anticipating the white reaction, a lot of it. So whites will react, and they're getting ready for that reaction by saying the white supremacy is the biggest threat, because the existence of whites is the biggest threat to diversity. The fact that they still exist and that they may not like to be replaced. So the whole system is flawed in the sense that it's not going to live up to the claim that diversity creates more harmony. We already see that it cannot live up to that. That diversity in the United States, the pre-existing Black population that has been there for a long time, hasn't yet fully assimilated, and it always seems to be apart. And then when you add more and more people from different cultures and races, there is less and less harmony. So the harmony claim is not working. So they need to come up with a reason for this breakdown, for this dysfunctioning of societies, and it is white supremacy. And so they know that whites are going to react against it. So they're getting ready for it. And that's what's going to happen. We are going to get into quasi-civil war situations, not in Canada. In Canada, I don't anticipate that. But I think in the United States, we are going to see a breakdown of communication. The Democratic Party and the populist Republicans won't be able to communicate. They can barely talk to each other in the media anymore. Fox News during the first Trump election would have conservatives sit down with others to talk. They can't do it anymore unless it's a totally pacified. Basically, he's not a conservative at all. They don't have it anymore. They cannot talk And just the other day, this journalist Jake Tapper from CNN said he will not allow anybody who questions the election, the legitimacy of the election, to be in his show. So I see this happening more and more, and at every level, the differences will grow and grow, and so this will create a quasi-like civil war where one party wants to eliminate the other party the moment they get elected. Hopefully, the Republicans, the populist part of it, will act far more aggressive than Trump did if they ever get elected, in the way that Biden is. So that's the phenomenon we're going to see. France too, the situation in France is going to deteriorate, and the French people will have their backs against the wall. So either they vote for Marine Le Pen, and if she gets elected, you're going to get a situation like you had with Trump, the election of Trump. There'll be such a massive hysteria by the entire globalist elites across the world to eliminate her, to take her down. And the Muslims and the Africans are going to get really aggressive if the Gallic people ever dare to sort of affirm something about France that's theirs. So they're going to have a civil situation there in France. And from there, it can start igniting and spreading to Britain. And then the Italians can start realizing something is going on. So that's where our hope lies. It's sad, it's bad. Our hope lies in the intensification of conflict, in coming out alive from a very bad situation spreading throughout the world. This is not going to be decided. You know, Bismarck, the German leader responsible for the unification of Germany, when was it, in the 1800s? Right now it escapes me.
Late 1880s or late 1870s.
Right, 1880s and so on. So he said the questions of our time are not going to be decided through parliamentary procedures and vote. They're going to be decided by blood and iron. I don't want to sound over dramatic, but the left has created a situation in which that's how things are going to be decided. And you can see the Democratic Party, what Biden is doing, what they did to the people from January 6th, and how they put the army to surround Capitol Hill for months. So that's where we are heading. You're still young. You're gonna live in very dramatic times. People, we had an interregnum of peace after the Second World War in the Western world. Many people in our side, deep thinkers that were influenced by Nietzsche and others, Madison Grant, they always knew that permanent peace is an impossibility among human beings. If you read the history of Europe, it was a very agonistic culture. There were continuous wars all the time. So let's not be delusional that somehow humans are aimed to live in a peaceful state of existence. Even if they did, they would get bored and they would find a way to disrupt it. So get ready for it, because you're gonna have a lot of stuff happening, and you're gonna have some excitement. So that's how you have to see it. Some excitement is coming. There's gonna be a lot of wars. They're coming after you, and you gotta get ready for that.
Well, it's a sobering thought, and it is absolutely the case. You've painted a future that is in line with the kind of thing that we regularly talk about here, and that the anti-whiteism is continuing. It is gaining tempo. Fortunately, we are also gaining speed and success here in service to white well-being around the world. So we're really excited about that. And it is going to be driven in part, exactly as Ricardo says here, folks, that the anti-whites, with their hubris and this hegemony that they've had for some time now, they are revealing themselves more and more. What was it? 2 years ago, we were talking about, it wasn't mask off. It was trench coat off. I mean, they're just revealing everything that they really desire to do to us. It is about resentment. We talk all the time about the motivation of an anti-white, and that it stems from jealousy and envy. They don't feel the connection, and irrespective of their race, they can be white and more anti-white than the most non-white anti-white people you'll come across. So it is a sick mindset, a sick motivation, and it is about the destruction of all that we know, love, and care about, the biological white erasure of Western kind, and of course the white erasure of all of these systems that we have built that make everybody, give everybody the opportunity to live wonderful lives, to live in peaceful environments, to have law and order, and etc. Something that all good people should, and I imagine, want to preserve. I'm going to take a look at the financial gifts now, as we have just crossed the hour mark, and see if you all have any questions. Make sure that you get them in really quickly, because we're getting ready to tap out. Before I do so, though, I want to quickly just mention that we firmly agree with Ricardo when he was saying earlier in our time together that immigrants are not to blame. There aren't any whole groups of people that are all bad or all doing wrong, and we firmly agree with that. There are good people in every single community, and we invite all good people from all communities to help us put an end to anti-whiteism, because their worlds that they live in are damaged and destroyed by the destruction of Western civilization. The choice to be in Western civilization, the choice to keep it the way that it is, the way that it functions, is one that you serve by helping us to put an end to anti-whiteism. That is what's destroying the world we live in, nothing else. None of these other ideas they want to put names on that make no sense. We don't use the names that the anti-whites give to themselves and to the things going on in the world. We have a financial gift from Mick Dozer. Thank you so very much, Mick Dozer, financially gifting $25 US. Thank you so very much. He writes here, I finished reading Go Free, and I'm reading Born Guilty a second time. The way you wrote Born Guilty was unique, and I truly enjoyed you sharing your life with us in the way that you did. Well, thank you so very much for those very warm words, dear brother, and that very fine $25 financial gift. We also have Rax with a question over here in the question widget on entropy. And Rax asks this of Ricardo: your opinions on, quote, conservatives such as Matt Walsh and Shapiro raising money more than $100,000 US for AOC's grandmother, yet not raising a single penny for the January 6th protesters who are now in prison.
I sort of came across that in passing, and I didn't stop to read about it, but generally about Shapiro, I mean, now we know, I sort of always knew, I never trusted him, that he's out for himself and his people. He's not interested in, he said it himself, the browning of America is not an issue for him. He's a grifter. I mean, he makes masses of millions of dollars. Matt Walsh has been better. Initially, in reaction to the jogger, he sort of took a mainstream conservative view, but I think he realized after seeing the riots that what our side has been saying is correct. A lot of people, by the way, are realizing that we have been right all along, that this kind of anti-white politics breeds violence, and BLM is a violent organization. So that's one of the good things, by the way, also, is that our ideas, even though we don't have a mass movement, our ideas make a lot of sense to a lot of people when they hear them. And so that's the one thing that keeps me going, is that fact. Even though politically I'm very weak, intellectually we are not. We really have that for us. And I think our ideas will win out because, for one, we are on the side of nature in many respects. And also we are on the side of heritage and the dignity of peoples across the world. We're not talking anymore about imperialism, colonizing anybody. We're just talking about the right of self-determination of all nations, which is a basic principle of the West. That's all we're talking about.
Very, very well stated, brother. And as we roll up here to the end of tap and tapping out, JK 160 comes in with a final financial gift, 10 US dollars. Thank you, brother. And he writes, great guest. And thank you, Jared, for the new song. Was listening to it driving around today. That's right, folks. Mr. George will tell you about that. The great order is what he is when he's making music. He'll tell you about that in just a moment when he gives his final thoughts and where you can find that magnificent new piece. But we will start with the great Dr. Ricardo Duchesne. Good sir, your final thoughts and where folks can find you.
Well, they can find me now in Gap. I'm there. And from there, you'll see occasional links to articles in the blog, the Council of European Canadians. I have an updated edition of Canada in Decay, which you can buy. It's not expensive. And if you're more interested in historical issues, but you don't want too academic a book, I would say Faustian Man in a Multicultural Age might be a good read for you, and you can purchase that as well. So that's what I will say.
Well, thank you, dear brother. It's been magnificent having you on. Always a great honor. And we're clearly going to have you back more often because you were just, I felt like coming out of my seat a couple of times. I was agreeing so much. If I had been somewhere where you were speaking publicly, I would have come out of my seat. I've been known to do that a time or two. But Mr. George, your final thoughts and where folks can find you.
Well, I should say this is the first time we've spoken since the folk book was published at the end of 2020. So I want to thank you again on air for graciously writing forward to that beautiful coffee table book that we put together with Tony at White People's Press. So thank you. I put the link in the chat a few times, and it's White People Press, no S at People's, just whitepeoplepress.com if you'd like to order that beautiful coffee table book. And hopefully I'll remember to put the link to that book in the post for this show once it's on the afterparty.tv. Of course, Ricardo's links that he's mentioned will also be there. The first episode, which was August 1st, 2019. I put that in the chat as well. If you like what you heard here today, that was a bit more of a sweeping overview of his work and thought. So go check that out. Everything is cataloged for you on the afterparty.tv. And then, I have a new song out. Horizon came out just a few days ago. And I am doing my best to learn a lot about song marketing. We're big believers here, Ricardo, that a lot of the pushback is going to come through culture, through a new kind of culture. And people who maybe not even think about politics too much, not all of us do. I have more of an artist mind. I don't follow politics day to day myself even. We'll just kind of assimilate things and pick things up through symbols, through the arts. Obviously, anti-whites use that leverage for decades now, and it's time for us to take that back. So it's very nice to be involved with people who get that. And I'm a musician, so I put out this rock song, combine a little bit of rock with electro synth stuff. And what was I saying? I'm doing my best to learn about marketing. So anyone, please go to my social media and follow the new places where I am. Go listen. If you go and listen to on a place like Spotify, try to listen to the whole song. It helps the algorithm. I learned if they see a lot of plays and people listening to the whole song in a short amount of time, it starts to recommend it to other people. we don't have the millions of dollars behind us, but we can be clever. And if one of us goes viral with something like this, it could help. It can help a lot to share this culture and people making all kinds of art, symbols that are sometimes, it doesn't have to be always on the nose, but it's just imbued with our kinds of sensibilities. And to me, that's really what is going to wake up a lot more people. It's just kind of, you don't have to argue all these political points. It kind of comes in more through in the sideways manner, the subconscious, through these symbols and people saying, yeah, I remember when there used to be more of this kind of music and it was a little more homogenous and it's our thing. It doesn't mean that we can never listen to, we're curious people, we can never listen to music or art made by other cultures. But as I always say, you have to have your core first. And when your core is strong, when your center is strong, then you can go play in the margins and go explore other things. We have a problem today where a lot of our people don't know who they are. They have an identity crisis. They have all these anti-white meme pathogens fed into their brain since birth. And they think that to do anything authentic artistically or authentic spiritually, they have to look to other cultures. They have to look to the Amerindian. They have to look to Asia and all that kind of thing. So we need to claim that back. And a lot of it's just going to come in very subtle ways. So I am a musician. That's one of the main things I do. So that is the story there. If you like that song, if you like that kind of music, guitar music, but with a bit of a contemporary twist on it, share it around, help out, write a comment. Even if you don't know what to say, just write something, just write yes or okay. Because again, it helps the algorithms. There'll be more. Should be back on a much more regular schedule now. Already working on a lot of new music for the summer. Going to get some releases out this summer. There's a lot of energy building this summer. There's a lot of other movements going on that may not be directly with what we do, but they're tangential. And I think it would be silly to ignore that. So I just want to put a lot of energy out there, have fun, not get too black pill. You have to have fun, joke around, be yourself on social media. Other people are going to see that and like it. Like I say, you don't go to a party and walk up to people and you just met them and hit them with all this heavy stuff and statistics and bad news. You get to know people, you befriend them, and then little by little you bring them more into your worldview. When they see you're a decent person, they trust you, you're funny, you have a rapport, it's a whole different ball game. So you have to remember that online as well. A lot of people don't see the consequences of their actions and words online. And I really think we have to bring a little more consciousness and social intelligence back into our online dealings. Not this community right here. This is the best right here that Jason's created, this community, the No White Guilt community, Going Free. But I know all of you kind of move in other communities, so bring that out there. That is my departing thought for the day.
Very well said, brother. It's been a magnificent time with everybody. Thank you all for participating in the live chat today, those who participated. If you wanted to be a wallflower, that's great too. I've just received a letter from a wallflower the other day that was really beautifully written. So thank you so very much for that. I'll be sharing some great testimonials tomorrow. Make sure you make it over to Going Free, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow for 4 hours of glorious music like Mr. George, testimonials of people who are going free, life transforming events, and our community growing worldwide. A big thank you to our financial gifters today. And Joe Biden's right eyebrow, stinky right eyebrow, for moderating today. I thank you so much for helping to keep us safe. Another big thank you to the great Dr. Ricardo Duchesne and the great Jared George. And folks, we look forward to